a tape with no label, thick with dust, at the back of a storage room no one visits anymore. No one in the building remembered it was there, and for half a century the silence around it was absolute. A 50-year-old recording has just made its singer a millionaire, the same man who gave up on that dream decades ago. So what happens when the world suddenly pulls a dead song out of the dark and hands it a second life? The story of how it survived 5 buried decades is strange enough, but what it did to the person who wrote it is something else entirely. In a modest New York apartment in 1931, a jobbing composer named Herman Hupfeld sat at his piano and crafted a delicate, melancholic waltz about the enduring power of simple human connection. He was a talented craftsman, a man well regarded within the theatrical circles of Broadway, yet far from a household name, destined to remain a footnote in the city's glittering musical history. The song, titled As Time Goes By, was slipped into a Broadway revue that closed after a mere few performances, leaving behind not a ripple of public interest but a quiet melancholy. In the decades before the internet, a song that failed to connect with its first audience did not simply fade. It was dropped from catalogues, forgotten by publishers, and left to gather dust, it seemed, for eternity. For 11 long years, the sheet music lay dormant, a ghost in the archives of Tin Pan Alley, with its composer watching his creation slip away into silence. Hupfeld, a man of immense talent but little commercial fortune, continued his work, writing songs for revues that no one remembered, earning a modest and unpredictable living from a musical world that had little use for him or his forgotten melody. He could not have known that this one, a song he had likely considered just another piece of work, would eventually define his entire existence and outlive his mortal body by almost a century. This was a time before recordings dominated the culture, so a song without a standout performance or a hit record was simply lost, an invisible, silent casualty of an unforgiving ecosystem. What, then, is the fate of such a masterpiece, birthed before its time and left to face the silence alone? But wait, the story of this particular waltz was far from over, as it was about to find its saviour in the most unexpected of places. Hupfeld, who had nearly given up on his craft, could never have foreseen that a Hollywood screenwriter, some 5,000 miles away in a sun-drenched California studio, would stumble upon the score and decide to weave it into the very fabric of cinema history. The song's quiet journey from a forgotten flaw to the hands of the right person at the exact right moment is a lesson for every artist who has ever doubted their work. Few creators have the gift of foresight to know which piece of their soul will be the one to endure, and Hupfeld's story is the ultimate proof of that human uncertainty. In 1942, Hollywood was a dream factory running at full capacity, yet one of its most legendary creations almost never came to be. A director, searching through the archives of the Warner Brothers music library, stumbled upon a song that had been gathering dust for over a decade, a tune by a man named Herman Hupfeld, who had long since given up on its success. This was the moment when a forgotten piece of sheet music was pulled from the shadows, and the mechanism of cinematic resurrection began its quiet work. When the film Casablanca finally reached the screen, the song As Time Goes By was not just a soundtrack piece. It became the emotional heartbeat of the movie, inseparable from the rain-soaked farewell and the haunting gaze of its stars. The public, captivated by the scene, rushed to find the original recording, transforming a decade of indifference into an overnight obsession. Hupfeld, who had watched his creation languish in obscurity for 11 long years, suddenly found himself lifted from his modest New York existence into the realm of extraordinary wealth, a seemingly impossible outcome for a man who had nearly abandoned his craft. The financial reversal was staggering, illustrating that a song's value is not fixed at its birth, but can be unlocked by the right cultural moment. The composer, who had earned almost nothing from his work, became a millionaire almost instantly, purchasing a grand villa and living out his final years in comfort until his death in 1951, leaving behind an estate worth $2 million. Who could have predicted that a single movie scene would turn a forgotten melody into a fortune that would outlive its creator? This is the power of the cinematic rescue, a pattern that would prove its worth again and again across the decades. But this was no isolated miracle. It was the first great demonstration of a model that would repeat itself many times over. Consider the fate of Ben E. King Stand By Me, a song that only reached number 4 upon its release in 1961, yet through its appearance in the 1986 film of the same name and countless others, accumulated a legacy that defies its humble beginnings. As of 2023, the track has amassed over 800 million streams on Spotify, becoming the most streamed song from the 1960s, a testament to how a film can breathe new life into a 70-year-old recording. The history of popular music is packed with such examples, proving that when a song is rescued by the silver screen, its second life can dwarf the first. In 1969, Bobby Hebb received a royalty check for $21,000 for his song, Sunny, a sum that translates to roughly $170,000 in today's money. This was a moment of triumph, a seemingly handsome reward for a tune that had become a standard. But to anyone who understood the music business, that figure was not a victory, it was an insult. It was a fraction of the immense wealth the song had already generated for everyone, except the man whose name was on the record. How could a hit that had been covered by artists from Frank Sinatra to Marvin Gaye, that had soundtracked weddings and slow dances across America, yield only a modest suburban salary to its creator? The answer lies in a system designed by the major labels, a machine that operated long before the digital age and was built on a single ruthless principle. Before 2015, when a young artist signed a contract, they were often selling not just their voice, but the very ownership of their work, surrendering the copyright for a sliver of the CD sales that followed. The label took the lion's share, and the artist was left with what was in effect a flat fee for a lifetime of creativity. This was a mechanism that quietly and systematically crushed the people who supplied the industry with its raw material, a fact laid bare in a 2023 SoundHub study of 10,000 songs. The research found that barely 12% of vocalists ever saw more than 10% of the revenue their own performances generated, a brutal statistic that widens the gap between the art and the artist. Yet the story of Bobby Hebb is not just about a single unfair deal. It points to a deeper, more corrosive truth that emerged from a 2022 Songtrust analysis, which found that 92% of singers receive nothing from digital platforms. The reason isn't always a predatory contract. It is often that they are not registered as the author or are missing from the distribution system, meaning their songs are effectively lost to the world, not because listeners do not care, but because of a clerical ghost within the system. So here is the question that lingers in the shadow of these figures. If the very people who created this timeless music are locked out of the revenue it generates, who truly profits from a song that never dies? And when the entire paradigm of consumption shifts, will the original artist finally get their due? Before streaming swallowed the music industry whole, the economics of an old song were brutally simple. It died. In the physical era, before the dominance of streaming around 2015, an artist received roughly 10 to 15 cents for every compact disc sold at a retail price of $15 to $18, a figure documented by Digital Music News in 2023. That was the final payment, a single transaction that closed the book on a piece of work forever. Once that CD left the warehouse, it generated no further income, no residual trickle, no second life. The song became a static object, frozen in plastic, waiting only for the landfill. But the dead, it turns out, were quietly out-earning the living. In 2022, according to Forbes, deceased musicians generated a staggering $1.5 billion in music revenue, a figure that shatters the folk belief that once an artist dies, the money stops. Elvis Presley alone, 45 years after his death, still commands $83 million a year, his voice as commercially potent as any living pop stars. And in the same year, Whitney Houston became the first deceased female artist to have a video surpass 1 billion views on YouTube with I Will Always Love You, a song released in 1992, 10 years after her passing, a record confirmed by Guinness World Records. How could a ghost outperform the living? The answer lies in the fundamental difference between a sale and a stream. A CD was a finite resource, sold once, then gone. The cash register rang a single time, and the silence that followed was permanent. A stream, however, is a recurring pulse, a monthly heartbeat of micropayments that never truly stops. A song an audience decades ago now generates a steady, compounding river of income, month after month, year after year, without any new effort from its creator. The old model was a dam that held water. The new one is a rain that never ceases. This shift produced a paradox that would have seemed absurd just 10 years earlier. In the 1980s and 1990s, a back catalogue song was worthless, a dusty relic in a record label's basement, a legal liability more than an asset. Yet by 2025, the world had flipped completely. Old songs are not merely valuable, they are gold mines, with catalogues trading for hundreds of millions of dollars. So what changed? The container of music changed, and with it the very nature of value itself. The internet was about to give the dead a voice, and no one was ready for what they would sing. There is a particular breed of cultural artifact that does not fade. It simply waits, gathering dust in the collective memory, until some unforeseen moment drags it into the light. In 1987, a young man from Newton-le-Willows with a voice like warm honey released a buoyant pop song that shot to #1, then quietly slipped from the world's attention as its creator himself slipped away from the industry that had made him a star. For 2 decades, Never Gonna Give You Up was a footnote, a pleasant memory for those who remembered the brick-like mobile phones and the hairspray of that era. Rick Astley, the man who had once stood on top of the pop world, had walked away in the early 90s, content to let the song fade into the same oblivion that claimed so many of its chart-topping siblings. But the internet, that great and chaotic archivist, had other plans, and in 2007 something strange began to stir in the anonymous corners of a message board. A user, with the kind of bored mischief that defines the web's early days, posted a link promising something tantalizing, only to deliver the 1987 music video instead, and the digital world collectively gasped at the audacity of the prank. What began as a single annoying bait-and-switch trick metastasized into a global phenomenon, a meme so pervasive that it earned its own name, a portmanteau of the singer's surname and the act of being duped. So complete was the cultural takeover that by 2008, Rickrolling had become the internet's signature joke, a shared secret that even major corporations and governments began to deploy, cementing a 21-year-old song as the unofficial anthem of the online age. The joke, however, soon turned into something far more consequential than a simple laugh, because the royalties from those billions of streams and the sync deals that followed began to flood in like a delayed tidal wave. According to a 2022 report from Page 6, this resurrected relic now generates an annual income for Astley in excess of $500,000, a sum he could never have predicted during his years of self-imposed exile. The man who had left the business to be a father had returned to find his old forgotten song had made him a fortune, and it left him, by his own admission, completely and utterly baffled. Did he ever expect the world to embrace him again with such ferocious enthusiasm? The answer, delivered with his characteristic humility, is a simple and bewildered no. Yet, his return was not a quiet one. In 2023, the man who had once walked away from it all stood on the main stage at Coachella before a crowd of 50,000 screaming fans, a testament to the bizarre, beautiful irony of it all. This leads to an uncomfortable and fascinating question. How does a forgotten pop song from 2 decades prior become the most resilient joke the internet has ever produced? The answer lies in the phenomenon of collective nostalgia, a shared memory that becomes more potent when filtered through the internet's distorting lens. It is not just the song itself, but the shared experience of the punchline. The communal, "I remember this too," that turns a simple prank into a global connective tissue. However, this miraculous resurrection is not a clean story of unbridled success, because a 2022 study by MusicWatch reveals a chilling disconnect that complicates the fairy tale. Their research shows that, while older music accounts for a substantial 12% of listening time in the United States, it generates a mere 2% of the industry's revenue, a stark reminder that virality and popularity do not automatically translate into a singer's bank account. The stream counts surge, the memes proliferate, but the financial payoff can remain obstinately out of reach for the artist who does not own the master or the publishing rights. Rick Astley, fortunate enough to have ownership in his own work, proves that a song is never truly dead, and if the internet can resurrect a forgotten pop tune for a joke, one must wonder what miracle it could perform for a song people actually cherish. In 2015, Fleetwood Mac revealed that Go Your Own Way, a song from 1977, had quietly generated more than $10 million in royalty after appearing in both The Walking Dead and Guardians of the Galaxy. That figure, reported by Rolling Stone, turned the old rock anthem into a financial phantom limb, still twitching with sensation decades after its original pulse had faded. How does a piece of music from another era suddenly begin printing money, and why do these cinematic resurrections seem so shockingly consistent? Then there is Tom Cochrane, whose 1991 hit Life is a Highway was earning roughly $250,000 a year by 2021, almost entirely because of its placement in the animated film Cars and its tie-in video game. The Toronto Star ran those numbers, showing that the song's annual income from licensing had nearly matched the record sales it generated in its peak year of release. For listeners who had grown up with the song, hearing it again inside a movie theatre was not just nostalgia. It was a collision of memory and new context, a moment where the past suddenly felt urgent again. The most devastating case study of all is Unchained Melody, recorded by the Righteous Brothers in 1965, a song that only reached number 4 on the charts and then drifted into the fog of radio obscurity. Bobby Hatfield, the voice behind that soaring tenor, died in 2003 without ever knowing that his greatest work was still waiting for its second act. When the film Ghost placed the song into its most iconic scene in 1990, the track began a resurrection unlike anything its creators could have imagined, ultimately producing more than $30 million in cumulative revenue for Hatfield's family and his singing partner, Bill Medley, who at 80 years old still receives a check for $400,000 a year from this single recording, according to Rolling Stone in 2023. This song, originally released in 1955 and then re-recorded by the Righteous Brothers a decade later, has now generated income across 7 decades through the film Ghost, the series Dharma, and countless other licensing deals tracked by the official charts UK in 2020. The mechanism at work here is emotional alchemy. A viewer watches a character experience heartbreak while a vintage melody swells in the background, and from that single moment the brain forges a neural link as sturdy as a wedding vow. 2 minutes of screen time can overwrite years of neglect, giving an old song a new memory bank to draw from. Why do these stories keep repeating with such uncanny regularity? Because a film does not just play a song, it redeems it, once again pulling something dusty from the archives and teaching an entire new generation to weep over it. A movie scene becomes the song's new home, and the audience becomes its new congregation. The old record was not dead, it was merely in the foyer, waiting for someone from Hollywood to open the door and walk it into a room full of listeners who had never heard its name. By March 2023, songs released before 1980 accounted for 15.6% of all Spotify streams globally, a share that had nearly doubled from just 8% in 2019, according to data the platform shared with Billboard. What kind of force could push a catalogue of decades-old recordings back into the mainstream with that kind of momentum? The numbers from America alone suggest this is no statistical fluke, as Spotify reported in 2022 that listeners in the United States now devote 53% of their total listening time to songs released before 2015, meaning old music has quietly become the dominant habit of the modern ear. This cultural tide did not rise by accident, because a study conducted at Aarhus University in Denmark in 2022, tracking 350 participants, found that people form their deepest emotional attachments to the music they heard between the ages of 16 and 24, forging a bond that never loosens with age. That finding explains why the songs of our youth carry such extraordinary financial potential, but an even more revealing discovery came out of the University of Tokyo in 2021, where researchers studying the reminiscence bump with 100 participants found that people in their 60s recall the music of their 15th to 25th years with striking accuracy, remembering those melodies and lyrics more reliably than they remember major life events. So when the pandemic forced the entire world into isolation in 2020, millions of people suddenly found themselves alone with their thoughts, cut off from the present, and they instinctively reached backward for comfort, turning the songs of their adolescence into a kind of time machine that could transport them back to safer, simpler days. Old records became more than nostalgia. They became emotional survival tools. And the streaming platforms quietly recorded this shift as the demand for catalogue music swelled beyond anything the industry had predicted. By the time the world began to reopen, the habit had hardened and the economics of music had been permanently rewired in favour of the past. But the biggest explosion was still to come, because it happened in 2022 with a song that was 37 years old. In the final week of May 2022, a song that had been sitting in the archives for 37 years detonated across the planet. After a single episode of Stranger Things featured it, Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill surged by an almost inconceivable 8,700% in Spotify streams within just 4 days, a number that Variety reported in a state of stunned disbelief. The same strange alchemy touched Barbara Lewis's 1966 soul classic, Baby, I'm Yours, which quietly jumped 300% in streams after it was woven into the second season of The Bear in 2022, according to Billboard. A forgotten song, it seemed, only needed the right screen and the right moment to wake from its long sleep. Kate Bush, then 63 years old, and long retired from the chaos of the charts, learned of the phenomenon from the quiet of her home. On BBC Radio, she described the moment she heard the news, admitting that she wept, saying it felt like a gift given to her at the end of her life, a validation she had never expected. Her younger brother later revealed the scale of her triumph. She had become the oldest woman to ever top the UK singles chart, a record claimed at 64, and she did it with a song she had written in 1985. The finances were as staggering as the sentiment. The Guardian calculated in 2023 that Bush earned roughly £2.3 million from streaming royalties alone, just from running up that hill in the final half of 2022. That is the kind of money that makes a person wonder. Why'd this song, frozen for decades, suddenly become the most valuable artifact in the room? The answer sits in the memory of an entire generation who grew up with it, who are now old enough to hold the purse strings of the culture. A song from your youth is not just a track, it is a time machine. When it is placed into a scene that captures a teenager's desperation, it sets fire to that stored nostalgia, and the resulting blaze is immense. That is the immutable lesson of Kate Bush's victory. A song never dies. It sits quietly, waiting for the perfect pairing, the right director, the exact scene where it can finally be reborn. When a dormant song is pulled from the archives and placed into a film or advertisement, the financial mechanics shift into high gear. The artist receives a synchronization fee, which averages between $50,000 and $250,000, according to Music Business Worldwide in 2023, and then the streaming revenue for that track can surge by 500 to 5,000%. For a major hit, a producer might pay up to $100,000 for a single 30-second usage, and the artist keeps half of that if they retained half the ownership. The whole transaction is a four-step ritual of permission, negotiation, agreement and payment. But here is the striking reality from Music Business Worldwide's 2024 report. Of the 10 highest-earning songs from sync deals in 2023, 8 were released before 1990. Old music is not merely surviving in this arena, it is dominating it. So how does a singer or songwriter actually check whether their own forgotten track is quietly generating revenue? The first move is to register with a distributor like DistroKid or TuneCore, or go directly through Spotify for artists to confirm the song even exists on the platform. Second, search for the song title, the artist name, and the composer name, and if nothing appears, the track is officially missing and must be uploaded to start earning. Third, register the copyright with the proper society, be it ASCAP, BMI or VCPMC, to collect money from ringtones, advertisements and public performances. Fourth, review the quarterly statements from those societies, comparing year over year to spot any sudden spike in earnings from an old piece. Once a song starts to show signs of life, there are 5 steps to maximize the windfall. The moment a track begins to trend on TikTok or appears in a production, update the metadata on the distributor account to ensure the label, author and genre are accurate. Then contact the music publisher or VCPMC within 30 days to declare the new usage and secure a place in the payout stream. Build a dedicated playlist featuring that song alongside tracks of similar mood, since a well-optimized playlist name and cover can lift streams by 30 to 50%. Create short-form videos for TikTok and Reels telling the story behind the song, because 78% of listeners discovering an old track are searching for its narrative, not just its melody. Finally, approach production companies and advertising agencies to offer the song for new placements while it is still hot, as sync prices can multiply 5 to 10-fold during a viral moment. Each stream pays only a fraction of a cent, somewhere between 3 and 5 thousandths of a dollar. But an old song pulling millions of plays every month across several years becomes a repeating source of income that never runs dry. That is the quiet engine behind the whole revival, and it is why the true value of a catalogue reveals itself not in a single headline, but in the relentless monthly tick of accumulated plays. By 2023, the global market for buying and selling old song copyrights had reached $5.7 billion, a staggering climb from just $1.5 billion in 2018, according to Bloomberg. This is the quiet financial revolution happening behind the music you already know. Before 2020, the industry giants like Universal, Sony and Warner controlled a full 80% of the revenue generated from these older songs. Yet the headlines was made by Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen, selling their entire catalogues for sums between $300 and $500 million. as reported by the Financial Times. Consider the case of Mariah Carey. She wrote All I Want for Christmas Is You in 1994 at 24 years old, and nobody believed it would ever be anything more than a seasonal novelty. By 2022, that same 28-year-old song was earning about $2 million every single Christmas season, pushing its lifetime earnings past $60 million. But the real masterstroke came in 2018, when Carey bought back the absolute rights to the song from Sony for $10 million. A bold move that industry watchers compare to buying Apple stock before it skyrocketed, as noted by The Economist. This valuation logic reaches absurd heights. In 2019, Roundhill Music paid $300 million for a collection of Beatles songs, a price that was 20 times the annual revenue that catalogue was generating, according to Reuters. What other asset class is priced at 20 times its yearly earnings? If you want to treat songs like an investment, there are 4 critical steps. First, only consider a song that has a stable income of at least $10,000 a year, with a growth rate of 5% or more over the past 3 years. Second, expect to pay between 12 and 15 times the annual revenue. A song earning $50,000 a year is worth between $600,000 and $750,000. Third, verify that the writer has no legal disputes with the singer or label, and check the original contract for a reversion clause that returns rights to the author after 35 years in the US. Finally, after you buy, put the song on streaming playlists and work with professional sync agencies to get it placed in films. Good management can boost revenue by 30 to 50% within 2 years. An old song is not just a memory, it is a tradable, investable asset, and the one who holds the copyright is the one who wins. In the bustling Vietnamese music scene of 2023, singer Phuong Thanh revealed a quiet financial victory that most of her peers had completely missed. She told VN Express that she still receives several hundred million Vietnamese dong every single year in royalties from her 2000 hit Chi Toi, all because the digital platforms now keep a meticulous record of every listen. Her colleagues, by contrast, often receive nothing at all, not because their songs are forgotten, but because they never signed proper contracts in the first place. Composer Nguyen Van Chung learned the same lesson through his own streaming statements, which he shared with VN Express in the same year. He explained that old songs like Nat Kai Kua Me from 2014 and Cam On Me now generate hundreds of millions of dong annually from Spotify and Apple Music, a figure that dwarfs the 10 to 20 million he once earned for selling a single CD to a singer. Back then, he received a one-time payment and the story ended. Today, the story never ends, because streaming pays out year after year after year. Why do so many Vietnamese artists remain locked out of this river of recurring revenue? The answer is painfully simple. They lack clear contracts, and they never registered their rights with the proper collection society. The global industry offers a stark warning about what happens when legal formalities are ignored, as a California court ruled in 2023 that streaming platforms owed more than $50 million to record labels for using songs written before 1972, because those older works carry a completely different set of legal protections under American law. Good fortune in music rarely arrives by accident. It arrives through paperwork that was filed decades earlier. The Vietnamese market is actually riper for this kind of revival than almost anywhere else on Earth. According to Luminate data from 2023, 78% of the most streamed songs on Spotify are more than 3 years old, which means the platform's audience is already addicted to the past, not the present. Old hits dominate the charts because they carry emotional weight that new releases simply cannot fabricate, and Vietnamese listeners are no exception to that rule. The lesson from Kate Bush, Mariah Carey, and Phuong Thanh is identical in every country. Own your copyright. Register it in the right place, and wait patiently for the moment when the world suddenly wants to hear what you wrote long ago. A song never truly dies. It just sits in the archive, covered in dust, waiting for the right person, the right screen, the right season to pull it back into the light. They called it a dusty relic, a forgotten tape buried in an archive, a song no one remembered existed. Then, 5 decades after it was recorded, the world reached in, pulled it from the dark, and turned it into a fortune for a singer who had long given up on the dream. What happens when a song thought to be dead is suddenly resurrected by a stranger's whim? That song, and the story of its impossible return to life, is a testament to the strange and patient arithmetic of the music industry. The same quiet magic that saved Herman Hupfeld as time goes by after 11 years of silence that waited for Ben E. King's Stand By Me to cross the billion stream mark, and that finally handed Kate Bush a tearful, world-conquering triumph after 37 years, happened here. These songs were never truly lost. They were simply waiting, holding their breath for the right moment to be heard again. The most beautiful part is that this moment could be waiting for any of us. So before you click away, dig out that old recording, check the paperwork, and make sure your name is on the song you wrote. Because you never know. The world might just be ready to fall in love with it. And if you have a song you are desperate to hear again, a melody you thought the world had forgotten, let me know in the comments. Sometimes all it takes is one person to remember.